Welcome everybody to Behind the Couch. I'm Dr. Shiloh. I am here with Dr. Scott, who is currently taking applications for personal assistance. So, turn them in, email them to us, slide into his DMs, and he needs somebody to organize his notes and his life and his laundry.
You know what? They're like my business partner, because I run a suite of therapy offices with a good friend of mine that I've known for years. And he does not have the level of ADHD that I have, but several times a year, he has a professional organizer come to his house. And he says that she's like unbelievable and like will set up like this area where she gets the scanner, her computer or your computer, and she just kind of like does this amazing consolidation thing. And she makes $80 an hour, and you have to book her months in advance. Like what a great, interesting talent to have. I mean, I could do it for somebody else.
Man,
yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, he stays on top of it.
He
has one of those like minimalist houses. Like there's no clutter anywhere, which is not my life. That would be
my dream. Yeah, my dream that was shattered as soon as I had a child.
Adrian and Ivy, yes, I'd like a Haldol, a smoothie with a Xanax chaser, please. Thank you.
Adrian,
which we may need after this week's episode. This is
geez, I know.
Some heavy stuff this year.
Yeah. So just some stuff off the top first before we get started into our topic here.
Are you broadcasting? Oh, here we are. Okay,
yeah. We have our Bonnie and Clyde watch party next Friday, the 17th. That will be at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Find the post on our social media and follow the instructions there. If you haven't done it before, it can feel a little tricky, so go through those. Or if you're a Patreon member, I always post those as well. It's through Amazon Prime Video. You will have to rent the video. And the way that it works is I send out a link, and then everybody clicks on that link. We don't have to all do it at the same time. It's not a 1, 2, 3 thing, but I can start it and then we're all watching the same feed or the same version. So we're watching it together. So please join us for that. It's a lot of fun, something you can do from home on a Friday night and have a drink, have some dinner, and hang out with us, please. And it's for everybody. It's not just for Patreon this time around, but we are going to do a Patreon only one with, I don't know, Color of Night, I think is what we said we were going to finally do, a really terrible 80s Bruce Willis movie, because that's our thing. Let's see, what else? For Patreon, I
have one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I want to say, so we had a super fun episode for us this week talking about crimes related to pageants, and being from the South, where pageants are literally a part of our culture in such an intrinsic way. I shared a couple of experiences, and again, our wonderful listeners who very kindly and professionally correct me on something. I described this very funny incident from many decades ago, watching someone walk very determinedly across stage with a very strange gait. And I described it using the incorrect term. And it wasn't that this person was disabled, but I said that she, one arm wasn't moving, and I was wondering if she was differently abled. And I was not aware that that is an archaic term. I mean, it's recently changed. We do not use the term differently abled. It is demoralizing, and it's minimizing to the person, and the preferred term is disabled. So thank you, Miss V, for giving us that correction. I really appreciate it. But also I wanted to make sure that people understood that this individual that I was commenting on was not disabled in any way. And that was shown very explicitly by her dance number, where all of her arms were functional, all body parts were
and
functional.
All of that white lycra.
All of that white lycra tube top and spandex dance pants. So
yes,
I only wish there was a videotape that I could find somewhere. If I can ever find any of that tape, we will have it on our show.
Oh,
that'll be our watch party.
I did go and search YouTube for the ventriloquist. I'm sorry, what's her name?
Paige Phillips.
Yes.
Winkle and Darlene.
Yes. So there's a very quick clip of her from that time with both of them. And then there's one more recent, I want to say like the 2017 Miss America pageant, that she did a piece, like a little hosting piece. And she has Dinkle with her. She has one of them, and she's yodeling ventriloquism.
I mean,
she's still at it.
You know, we can laugh about it, but it was an amazing talent. I mean, I remember her doing both Dinkle and Darlene at the same time, and it was like, I mean, even then I was probably like a little more bitchy, you know, all those years ago, just being an immature young person. And now I look back on it, it's like she worked her ass off for that talent, like many of the women did for these pageants. But
sure.
So if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, please go back and listen. And then Patreon.
I would love to see just like a list of the most unusual talents that they've done, you know, because you have the kind of the obvious ones, but it would be really neat to see a spliced together video of all the most unusual ones.
Yeah.
I mean, my kid and her talent show that she did a couple years ago, she, kind of the same old thing that kids are doing, especially like little kiddos. They're like lip singing to songs and stuff. And she's like, I want to do stand up. I was like, all right. So we practiced 3 jokes, and it was so cool to see something different. And she killed it. I think one of them went over the head of a lot of the kids.
I love it. I think
That's brave.
I think stand-ups and sketch comedians are some of the most brave people in the world. Because I remember going to comedy nights and I would just cringe. I was like, oh, please be good. Please be good. I don't want you to fail. I can't take that.
I can't take it as an empath.
Yeah. As an empath.
Yeah. There's some Patreon mail that got returned for the folks who signed up in August. I just sent it out last week. And I got it back, and I know why I got it back, but it's going to go back out on Monday. So it's a little behind. And we would like to thank our newest patron, Miss Vicky B. So thank you, Vicky.
Welcome, Vicky, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you.
It certainly is.
And one more thing, like we did some review grubbing in our last couple of episodes, which, you know, we're always going to grub for reviews because it's just part of being a podcaster and content creator, is that's part of the algorithm that, you know, drives us towards success. And we just appreciate the support. We also appreciate any kind of thoughtful critique and criticism. It is so much appreciated.
Absolutely.
As we have said over and over again. And we got a review this week that I want to understand what it was about. I don't really care about the rating. You know, if we don't float your boat, I completely understand it. Mm-hmm. But if you're listening to us and reviewing old episodes or reviewing new episodes, or you're new to the show and you have a critique, you can't be vague. Like this review was so vague. I don't even. But
we would prefer you don't.
Yeah, I mean, you can. You have that choice. But if you really want to make a difference, then, you know, there's a great professional way to say things that we can benefit from, and we would love to benefit from it. So thank you. Absolutely.
And I find the most professional way where people can get very specific is if they just shoot us an email and let us know. Yes. And we have had that, and it has, there are times where people have commented on things that they didn't like the way we said it. And I know there's a wide variety to that. And you and I have said, like, look, this is a podcast. This is edutainment at the best. You know, we are not teaching a college, grad school course here or something. But I have really internalized some things that people have reached out and told us about, to where I have thought about it in the therapy room with a client of, how am I wording this? So it does make a difference. It makes a difference actually professionally, even if it doesn't translate to exactly what's happening here on the podcast. Scott and I take this stuff. So, please, the more specific you can be, what Scott said, it'll make more of a difference, I believe.
It will. And it will also clarify, because sometimes our response is going to be, thank you so much for the feedback. That's not really what we do.
Yeah.
This is not what our show is about. I think your idea is great, and you might want to talk to this podcast about it that has 5 times our listener amount, but that's just not what we do. So you know, we have to find this happy medium in that world. But once again, we're always happy. We're glad to have professional critique and criticism.
Yeah. Adrian says he'll handle all of our psych complaints. Trust me, okay. I'm a psych nurse. Or all our complaints, not psych complaints.
You do not want to piss off a psych nurse, let me tell you.
I can't even imagine the complaining.
I remember, like, you know, on SNL, there's they have a running gag where they do takeoffs on The Bachelor.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever there's like a male host, is like, and then all of the girls will keep kind of breaking in and introducing themselves. And one of the funniest introductions, he goes like, well, what do you do for a living? And she goes, I'm a psychiatric nurse's patient.
And what's the thing they always sit down when they say something?
This is nice.
This is nice.
I like this.
I like this. I can't even say I've watched an episode of The Bachelor ever in my life.
Yeah, I will certainly. Oh, well, so we're talking about a 20-year anniversary of something that was absolutely horrific to this world and to this nation. And we'll get to 9/11 in a second. I'm talking about 20 years of the Kardashians today, which I can proudly say I've never watched a full episode. I've never been able to make it through a full episode.
I have. It's just it's like looking
Train
through
wreck.
a little peephole, like, and going, why do people watch this? To see what it's all about.
It's a mystery.
Sure is. All right. Now that we're done comparing a family to 9/11. So yes, clearly, you know, this live stream today is falling on the 20th year since 9/11. I hate using the word anniversary. I feel like that should be reserved for celebrations. But 20 years, and you know, we had tossed around a couple different ideas for today, but we thought it apropos, especially because it's such a milestone since then. And we had just on our listener question live stream, one of our questions we answered was, where were you? What were you doing on 9/11? And so, you know, I think that's such a great question for processing for people to talk about it. And I want to encourage, if anyone wants to pop on today, I mean, we're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about psychological impacts of this on people that, you know, from people who were there to people all across the country. But if you want to pop on and talk about it or process anything, or if you want to put in the chats, the comment section, wherever you're watching from, about where you were that day and how it impacted you, please feel free to. We'll try and catch those if we see them. But just the other people tuning in, getting to read through those can be really important. We don't want this to be traumatizing, so we're not talking about the event itself necessarily, or the events. And I have found that that's something that deliberately I try not to do. Is like on Instagram today, I repost through stories like every post that I see on 9/11, just to share those and have it fill up the Instagram stories feed. But I don't post anything if it's an imagery of the towers falling or being hit, or of injured people, because we don't need to traumatize each other over and over again in that way. And we all know where to find it if we want to go look at it. And I'm one who does like to dive into this stuff and revisit it when this time of year comes around.
Yeah.
I just finished, which I started last year around September. I just finished this week the book Only Plane in the Sky, which is incredible, and listen to it on audio if you like. And that's referring to when the president's plane was the only plane in the sky. But what the author did was take quotes from people who lived through this or were experiencing it in some way. And it's literally a book of quotes that just take you chronologically through what happened for basically that 24-hour period. It's very, very good. And then I started the documentary on Netflix called Turning Point, which is nice because it goes into history of Afghanistan and the wars there, preceding us being in any wars there. Just gives you some context, because I think 20 years later you can go, what was that all about again? You know, and I know some of us are fielding questions from children about it. So those are good things to revisit that don't get lost to history. All right. Any thoughts, Scott?
Well, no, I thank you. I think this is it's a beautiful introduction to this. And I want to be careful. We both kind of divvied up what we were going to cover today. And so I want to be careful about, I mean, clearly there's a lot of history that gives us understanding of how these events came out, how they played out, how our government responded. There's a lot of controversy about how it was responded. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. We are not touching on any of those. I don't feel like any of that is helpful. What we want to do is we want to focus on, the people that did not survive, the people that did survive, the families, what happened as a result of them experiencing this psychologically, what it did to the country, and also people that are still dealing with the psychological and physiological sequelae today. Yeah. We're going to touch on that.
And Tori, I just want to acknowledge what you put in the comments, and we're thinking about you, and we completely understand if this is too heavy for you today. So I remember I was putting together a presentation for law enforcement about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I use post-traumatic stress disorder in a clinical term because that's what it is called in our DSM. I do understand that the term post-traumatic stress is much more accepted for those who are survivors of trauma and who like that term better, and to not feel as if they're being labeled or that they are disordered themselves. So I might go back and forth. I kind of walk between those two worlds too, because and I think a lot of us do, right? A lot of us are trauma survivors. A lot of us, if you look at 70% of the population is involved in a traumatic event at some point in their life, meaning, and that strict definition is meaning that your life has been threatened, or you thought you were going to die, or great risk of bodily injury. And about 70% of the population experiences that at some point in their life. So, I've certainly been on that side of it before as well. So if I toggle back and forth between PTSD and PTS, it's just because I'm kind of talking clinically sometimes here. But anyway, I was putting this presentation together about post-traumatic stress disorder and law enforcement, critical incidents. And I had a section in there, and that was about 2000, maybe 2010, maybe 2011. So, 10 or so years after 9/11. And it was research that I would cite and talk about where people even across the country that had nothing to do with it, were not there, did not have loved ones involved, felt effects and had symptoms of post-traumatic stress just from watching the footage over and over again. And, what I've already talked about, like not wanting to re-traumatize each other. But we were all glued to our televisions, and what else are they going to show? We watched many minutes of, live feed of destruction, but then what they would show over and over again were the worst parts. And that's something that absolutely through a television, through repeated exposure, can start to impact you to where you actually have symptomology of people who experience trauma firsthand, not unlike vicarious trauma, right? Through some of the professions that are touched by trauma, but not directly. And that's essentially what it was. I mean, you can't call it firsthand trauma. It would have been vicarious, or through the television, whatever you would call that. But I just found that so fascinating as somebody who is just starting to get into the research of that area.
Yeah, I distinctly remember, I look back on now about how I experienced it and what happened to me that day. And I'm just sort of aghast that I went through a day almost with some normalcy. Like I went to work and people showed up. I was helping somebody cast a series of commercials. One of my bosses, Patricia Noland, and everybody showed up for the audition.
Yeah.
And it was completely, I had like what I would call, Shannon, thank you so much for coming
Hi.
in. Hey,
Hey.
I feel like I had like that. I feel like I dissociated because we were in this huge room. There was a monitor. I was signing people in. I was giving them their sides, and they just kept playing the clip over and over again. And I had woken up that morning with my roommate walking in with his cup of coffee and very calmly going, "You probably need to turn on the television." Which today I go, I mean, at the time when after it happened, I was like, that was your reaction? You like, and now I realize that, you know, it's many, many years later, and I realize everybody reacts differently and everybody has a different kind of emotional response. And that was how my roommate responded.
Lots of people were telling each other to turn the TV on.
Yeah.
How do you even articulate it?
And then I just dissociated like all day. And I kept thinking, I'm so helpless. Like I'm sitting here, we're casting commercials. And I know Patricia felt the same way. That's that sense of unrealness, I think, is what many people experienced during this time.
Yeah. Hey, Shannon.
Hello. Someone was asking me about this earlier today, so it's like really fresh in my mind. Just like remembering where I was, and I was 25. I was such a baby, you know, like it's
right.
So, I don't know. I mean, I was at work. I worked in an office. I was living in Milwaukee at the time, and I got in late because that's how I roll. And a colleague pulled me aside and said, you know, have you heard what happened? And I was like, no. I thought she was like joking with me at first. And so, I mean, I probably were like, this isn't real right away. But, you know, even though we were in Milwaukee, we were in the middle of the country, you know, all we thought about was like, you know, there might be other things going on up there. It almost felt like apocalyptic in a way. Like you didn't know where they might strike next, or, you know, I mean, I don't know that Milwaukee is like a hot spot, but we were thinking, you know, we're so close to Chicago, you know, it was really terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole, and that's how terrorists operate. I mean, the underpinning, the foundational point of terrorism is to strike not only clear targets, but also keep everyone in a heightened, hypervigilant state of terror that it could happen to you. And out here in California, we were thinking, what represents America more than anything else? Is it Hollywood making our movies that they hate because we're making them the other? Or is it Disneyland? And, you know, like we're huge Disneyland fans. Are they going to bomb Disneyland? And I'm not saying that these are, maybe that might be humorous to some people. And I completely understand any kind of reaction anybody has. But I think that what you're talking about, Shannon, is that sense of disbelief and everyone just trying to make sense of it in the best way that they can in this horrible situation. What an experience at 20. And I was older. I mean, I was a few years older at that time, but like, I do wonder about like, what did children think at the time that it happened? What did young adults think? You know, because the certain age and stage of life you're at has such a window on how you perceive the world, and a major world event like that, it's a big deal.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
What they tell kids too now, like I have a 12-year-old daughter who this morning I asked her, do you know what September 11th is about? And she's like, you mean 9/11? Like, because everything is sad. Right?
Yes.
And she didn't really know. I mean, and I'm like, do I tell her? I don't know. Like, I'll probably Google it, how to tell your 12-year-old about, you know, world crises.
Well,
maybe not.
And you and I can chat about this later. But I did the thing. I actually brought it to my daughter the other night, and I was telling some friends I have this beautiful like Life magazine put out this book like a year or two afterwards, just a beautiful pictures and stories and things like that. And so I brought it out for us to look at, and, you know, didn't look at the gory, horrific stuff, but focused on the survivor stories, the hero stories. But of course she's going to ask like, well, why did they do this to us? Was her main question. And so that was a big conversation, and it led to such wonderful, I mean, to just hear how your child has so much empathy and tolerance for people, and just, the simplest things coming out of her mouth. Like, well, just because we're different, they shouldn't not like us, or they shouldn't want to hurt us. And they should think about that if they're going to murder other people. And it's just so pure. I was saying, like, I just want to bottle that up forever,
Yeah.
But I think kids often lead the conversation once we get it started, and you just meet them where they're at, really, with some of it. But I think it's important, because I hear just the anecdotal stuff that I've been hearing. They're not teaching it at school.
Yeah, like they've heard of it, but they don't go. And honestly, I appreciate that, because I want to be the one to tell her, or my husband, one of us, because we know what she can handle. And, I have my 8-year-old, he's not there yet. But she's starting to get a read on the world, and the fact that not everybody is to be trusted in, and not everybody's nice. So, I'm sort of, wondering, I think I will definitely proceed with caution, not go too far, because you can't unsay it. You can't unhear it.
Right.
Well, it leads to so many other questions too, because you're like, because when they do, how can they dislike us? And then you have to explain, I mean,
religion,
global politics and religion is really
extremist religion.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the role we play in, in colonization of other cultures and it's a difficult conversation to have with a kid.
It is.
Certainly.
It's also really like somber in my company. I mentioned in the chat that, my company lost 300 people in the towers, brokers, and I wasn't there. Obviously I was in Milwaukee, but still, there are people who've been in my company for decades that still talk about it and get upset. And, I mean, what was the whole death toll? Like around over 3,000. I'm like, wow, that's 10% of the people from my company.
It's huge.
I mean, it's always, they always do something around this time. But it just seems so unbelievable. I don't want to talk forever, so I don't want to.
That's okay. No, thank you.
I do want to share one more thing.
Yeah.
That I listened to a podcast called Criminal. I don't mean to not talk about LA Not So Confidential, because it's
we love cross promotion. Don't worry about it.
Well, the podcaster, her name's Phoebe Judge, and I do enjoy her very much.
Criminal.
I don't think she needs cross promotion from us.
Yeah, no, she's all set.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Judge.
She also has a podcast called This Is Love or something like that. And I think in place of doing a criminal episode, she posted a This Is Love episode. And if anyone wants to hear an uplifting story about 9/11 and a guy who is blind, he has his guide dog with him at work, and they're in a building that gets hit. I think the first building that got hit. I'm not positive.
Yeah.
But like this dog, if you're a dog person, they do mention, yes, at the end, they do say the dog passed away. Okay. But they don't focus on that. It's not a, hi, Michelle. It's not a story. Yes. Oh my,
so wonderful.
It's so good. Like just hearing about the guy, who he was, the guide dog was working with. I think his name is Michael and her name is Roselle or something. But it was like so sweet to listen to how he like really had a lot of faith in his dog to get him down the stairs. And there were people involved too, but he was just amazed by her composure, I guess. I don't know if that's a word you can give to a dog, but
she was on a mission.
She was, exactly. And so, but to hear me say it and hear him tell it are two totally different things. It's amazing. So if you need a pick me up, that's what to go to. And I loved hearing that. I needed to hear that today.
Aw, that's great. Yeah, Michelle knows this story.
Yes.
The dog got led 80 people out of the building.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
right? And like through the rubble once they got out. Could you imagine being blind and this is happening? I mean,
I couldn't.
the
I
terror
know.
anyway.
It's hard enough thinking about it, having all of your senses and
Mhm.
not imagine, but it just really goes to show you like how we don't deserve dogs.
I know.
We don't deserve.
We don't deserve dogs.
No.
Not at all. Yeah, thanks for that, Shannon.
Yeah.
If you find a link while you're on tonight, could you pop it in?
Yeah,
people
I'll do
can
it right
find
now.
That episode.
Okay.
Cool. Michelle, bye. One of our resident New Yorkers.
Yeah, that's why I'm a mess today, but I also thought that I should, well, looking like a mess. But I also thought that, this would be a good, because I had a long conversation with my therapist about 9/11 because I was, I'm a New Yorker. I've lived on Long Island and in New York my entire life. And, I was I had like this tangential relation to what happened on 9/11 because I was supposed to be in that area that day and my job got canceled. I was like 21, 22 years old, I think at the time. I was working for some film production companies in my other life prior to law. And, I got a call from the producer on some of these documentaries that we were working on. And they were like, oh, we're a little behind. We don't need you to come in. And I was like, great, that's awesome. I have classes. I was in college. I got classes. Fine, no worries. But I slept in. And by slept in, I slept till like 8:15.
Right.
And my dad didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be, that I was staying home.
Oh my gosh.
So, and he's trying to call my ancient cell phone, my 2001 cell phone, and he can't get through because there was every single communication, like cell phone communication was just down. So finally, like, I wake up and I hear the house phone ring. I'm like, who is this? And it was my dad. I pick up the phone and he's like, oh my God, you're home. I'm like, yeah, of course I'm home. Like, where else would I be? Why'd I be answering the home phone, Dad? And he's like, have you watched the news? Have you turned on the TV? I said, no. And he's like, I thought you were in Manhattan because I worked right off of Canal Street. And my building...
Is Canal Soho?
I was right near the Holland Tunnel.
Okay.
And the block where the office I was working on ended up being the cutoff for where you had to show proof of like residency or proof that you were working if you weren't a rescue worker or a recovery worker, in order to go down there to keep creeps and
looky-loos out,
and people who might want to be disgusting during that time. I would have to, after 9/11, I would have to go and show my AD and show a letter from my company and say, this is where I work. But I just will never, one of the things that always sticks with me is, just hearing the panic in my dad's voice, because my dad has always been this very, he's not a panicked person. He's gruff. He can be funny, but he's not a panicked person.
Yeah.
And that was the one and only time in my life, in 40 and a half years of living, that I ever heard my father sound panicked, because he thought that I was in downtown Manhattan that day.
Yeah. But
And
hugely relieved, I'm sure. Panicked yet relieved.
So just in the spirit of talking about survivors, another thing that that comes to mind, which I don't get a chance to talk about that often, is I currently work with one of my detective investigators who was working for the Attorney General's office at the time, and he was there when the planes hit and the buildings went down. He was also a physician's assistant, and there's a photo of him tending to a woman who was injured. And he was like helping just like take, people who were injured and, getting them to where they needed to go and everything. And I meet this person. Now I work with him. He's one of my investigators. And, he suffered a lot of 9/11, post 9/11 illnesses. And he is still going. This guy has more energy than I will ever have in my entire life. There are some times I look at him, I'm like, Eric, I cannot match you right now. But just like the fact that like we call him the $6 million man all the time because no matter what happens, no matter what befalls him, he just like gets right back up and starts going again. And it's
Talk
just
about resilience.
Yeah, and he's a really amazing person, and to know that he was there and that he openly talks about what he went through. And I think that I think there's a stigma, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a stigma amongst you have like men talking about their feelings, especially men in law enforcement talking about their feelings, and he's very, very open about how he is, what happened to him, how it affected him. He won't necessarily talk to you about what he saw, but he'll tell you how it affected him.
Wow,
and
that's the important part.
And it's really, to me, that's like, true survivor, true hero. And, I get to work with him every day. And it's really cool. So that's
incredible.
That's kind of my silver lining, where, when you think about this day and everything that happens, I actually get to talk to a survivor every day. And that really gives me a lot of perspective, and it makes me feel good.
I bet. I wonder if you took those male first responders from that day, if they are just like, fuck the stigma, I wonder if majority of them, because it was so traumatizing and it happened to so many of them, they have this shared experience, if they are more open to talking about what it did to them and what the impacts are.
It's interesting because I knew a handful when I worked in Queens for the district attorney's office. I knew a lot of homicide detectives that went down there from Queens who helped with the recovery efforts, but they didn't talk about it that much. It was very different, and I don't know if it was. It would be interesting to hear. I've only been subjected to certain groups that have had this experience. I don't know any New York City firefighters.
I have heard several times from people that I know that were not first responders, but were supporting first responders at that time, that they kept describing it as that everything just felt unreal. That, for that 30 days afterwards, there was the ultrafine particulate that was caught in the air. So there was always like this haze, there was dust on everything. People so that you would go in and people kept digging. I'm so sorry to be so blunt about this, but they would find body parts, bits and pieces. And it was just like trauma on trauma. I'm not surprised that people didn't talk about it. I think sometimes that your trauma response is to dissociate and to go into automatic, and it's just not safe. It's not emotionally safe to dig around and process that kind of thing like we would do in a debriefing, like Shiloh and I. Sometimes we're finding out more and more as we know more about trauma, that sometimes going in there with an ice pick and trying to break up that trauma right after it happens is not the right thing to do. Let the body take care of itself for a while.
I talk about that with my BetterHelp counselor all the time. Having worked in homicide for 5 years, I didn't feel like the amount of things that I saw when I would go to crime scenes, I didn't feel like I processed it at the time. It all seemed very surreal.
Sure. Surreal.
And then now
so you're seeing it as surreal is keeping you safe.
Right.
But unfortunately, what surprises us is that we keep piling all that surreal stuff up, right? It's back here right outside our periphery. So I'm glad you're talking about it, though. I'm so glad.
Well, and that comes down to, what is healthy compartmentalization, and 9/11 being a true outlier, right? But the jobs where you're seeing this stuff day in, day out as part of your job, where you are having to block some things from your awareness at different periods of time and fine tune that skill to be able to do your job. Because if you're a first responder, if you are putting yourself in harm's way, if you're a member of our military, what, name it. There's two coexisting realities. They're in direct conflict with each other, right? Here's a burning building that I need to run into, yet I have a family at home that I want to be around for a long time. One of those has to go into the background for you to be able to function and do your job. And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday about where does compartmentalization and empathy fit, especially for first responders, because we can look like we're so desensitized because like, just give us the facts and let me get done with this call so I can get the next person that needs my help. But if we didn't have some sort of blocker there, we'd be messes and we wouldn't be able to help anybody. Right. Just be feeling it all day long. Or therapists,
And one of the things that, the last thing I'll say, one of the things that at 9/11 really I remember thinking was, my Dan, he was in the Marine Corps Reserves at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remember that night after, of 9/11, just thinking like, oh shit, he's going to be deployed. Like, this is insane. Yeah. I expected at first that he was going to end up going into the city to provide security, but that didn't happen. But January 2003, he comes back from, one of his drill weekends and he's like, we're being deployed to Kuwait and we're going into Iraq. And, that's something too that, I've been learning, just like the things that were going on during like that next step of life. I was a graduate student. I was going into Manhattan all the time. Mm-hmm. I was used to seeing National Guardsmen, in every single subway station. I would get off at West 4th to go to NYU and, there'd be National Guardsmen standing there with M16s. And, it's not something that you expect to see. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, Dan's overseas, and there was always this real threat that he could not come home.
Sure.
And that was very, very tough to deal with. I mean, thankfully, he came home physically intact. I think that the same way that I had to process certain things and deal with what I had to deal with when I was in homicide, I think that, Dan and the men and women he served with, I think that they have their own version of it. And one of the things that really, again, an upside to this, during COVID, they all reconnected, all the people that he served with. And they're all in a huge WhatsApp message, and they've been supporting each other no matter where they are. And, he tells me about that. And it makes me so happy to hear that.
Absolutely.
To know that especially because it's, again, predominantly men, being able to, process and talk about all of these things. And it has become a real good upside to everything that happens.
And I'm sure this last month, they've been a huge support to each other and just processing what it feels like, for us to no longer be in Afghanistan and what that means to them. So good. I'm glad they
I remember at the time, so I was actually still trying to do a talent management company. So on the day of the event, I was helping my former casting boss cast a commercial, and all of these conventions, these talent conventions and audition conventions I was kind of on this board that traveled around the country. And I mean, that's a whole story in itself, but suddenly all those got shut down, clearly because there was no air travel, which was fine. For me, it's interesting. I think that this sort of events like this just sort of give you an idea of who you are, like they really can teach you things about yourself. And I remember when we started traveling again, and I marvel now looking back, it's like people were in the air within 2.5 months after this happened. That's miraculous given the enormity of what happened. And I was in LAX, heading out to probably Houston or something for the weekend to do this convention, and going through security. And so security was ironclad, and I just didn't see a big deal. It's like, okay, I take off my belt, I take off my shoes, I get patted down. I don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. Of course I'm going to do this. And this woman in front of me, so well appointed in the most beautiful tailored Chanel suit with beautiful heels and her matching attaché, lost her shit that she had to take her shoes off for inspection. I mean, she just had a meltdown, throwing her case, to this
Sorry,
day,
call
it
her
really,
up to secondary check-in.
seriously, it just astounded me. And people were like, I mean, I remember people going, man, I mean, other pastors going, hey, calm down. Do you realize what just happened?
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm going to be late. And I mean, and anyway, so all these years later, I think that like, I can't help but think that, you know, world event level tragedy catastrophes really give us an idea of who we are. And in her case, that was not, I hope that she came away from that with some insight. I certainly was like able to walk away from that feeling good that like, oh, I like where my moral center is, that I care enough about other people that I don't really give a shit about being inconvenienced.
Right.
And here we are 20 years later, and we have the same thing about masks. Like a piece of cloth over my mouth really does not inconvenience me that much, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about protecting others too. Well, we were having this conversation on our group chat today about what would we do if we were in a situation like those passengers on Flight 93. And, you know, my comeback to just kind of that question posed was every single flight I got on after that happened, that's all I was thinking about.
Yeah.
And when, you know, my husband and I got together, like we literally, you know, there's probably not many couples that have more situational awareness than we do, but like we literally have those conversations or have had them. Now we can kind of we have telepathy because we've been married, you know, 18 years or whatever. But you know, it's sizing people up. It's where are we sitting? It's all of that. And we know what we would do in those moments. And those are really hard things to ask ourselves. I think for some of us, it could be hard. And Scott and I have talked about this on the show, like you think of what you would do, but in the moment, best laid plans.
Absolutely. I mean, best laid plans. I do think that this event shifted the narrative in terms of what we would do.
Yes.
Yes. And I shared back the story of like, because I remember processing it with Dan, you know, that we'd been together that long, and it was probably a couple of months afterwards. And I was still so astounded because, you know, people were told like just calm down, everything's going to be fine, or, you know, we will kill you if you know, because they did kill a couple of flight attendants. And so everybody was like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And people were figuring it out as it went on that it wasn't going to be okay. And I asked Dan, like, what would you do? And my stoic husband is not a braggart by any means. He is absolutely not. But he kind of looked thoughtfully and he said, I think the safest thing would be to grab whatever luggage you have and throw it. If everybody had thrown and just barraged those guys with it, and then you would have taken, and he goes, I think maybe if I had my laptop and I was able to swing it, he goes, but you know, you have to go into that knowing that you might be one of the ones that gets killed. I mean, like, which is what was at Flight 93. There were some people that really, you know, clearly they rushed the front. I don't know if I would do that, but what is interesting to this conversation is that we all think about it now, right?
Yeah.
Before we had this naivete and this like age of innocence where you didn't have to think about things like that. I don't think that there's anyone of a certain age that doesn't make those kind of considerations.
Yeah, I would make those kind of considerations anytime I got on the New York City subway when I lived in Queens. I was always
true.
I mean, like,
all right,
I would
get here.
No, yeah, like, you know, I'd walk in because, you know, I'd walk into a subway and, you know, I'd want to know, I'd be looking in those windows like, okay, you know, who's in there? Because, you know, again, I was very acutely aware of, you know, where the crime was taking place, you know, what kind of people, you know, could be out there. And, you know, the fact that, you know, yes, we do have people who would be riding the New York City subways who, you know, did, you know, suffer from substance use disorders or something else that might not have, you know, absolute control over their faculties, but could eventually pose a danger to innocent people. And, you know, like, that's something that, you know, and I think about it, you know, when I be at the airport or when I'm sitting on a plane, but, you know, being that I'm not, you know, I'm not a law enforcement officer, you know, I'm an attorney. It's like, but what I was thinking about, you know, because when I look back at that question, one of the things I realized, I was like, you know, I feel like I derive a lot of strength from my boyfriend, from my Dan, because he is the type of person in that situation where He's trained to know what to do. He does know what to do. And, I've seen him get in the middle of people, in a safe way in the past. And, I'd be like, Dan would be the, God forbid we were in that situation. If Dan said to me, this is what's going to happen, I could confidently say, I'm right there with you, sweetie.
Yeah.
Because, it's, but then when I think, I'm like, I don't know about, like, what about me on my own? Like,
Right.
I've been a crazy bitch on the subway a couple times when I've had to be. But, put in that situation, I want to think that I would be a person that would help. But I can confidently say that, if I was with Dan, I think I would draw a lot of my strength and courage from him because of the way that he is and what he knows how to do.
Hey, the fiercest band of Spartan warriors was made up of lovers. The sacred. Were you guys aware of that? Like, it was the Sacred Heart band. It was an army made up of warriors that were all lovers, because the generals knew that if there was an attachment there, they would fight all the harder.
Oh.
And they were ferocious. They were absolutely ferocious.
I learned something new from Scott, like, every time.
I'm a wealth of useless information. Let me just tell you that.
I'm going to sign off so I can continue listening to everyone and read the comments. But I just wanted to, for everyone, can we, Justice, where are you, baby? There she is.
Oh,
hi, Justice.
She's just here to say hi. She's a very good companion.
Next time you should have the iPad and the phone so Justice could grab the other spot.
If only. You guys are amazing, and I'm glad that I think that this was the kind of thing that I needed today. So I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Michelle,
Thanks,
look,
Michelle.
this is an absolutely wonderful synchronicity. It's not what we planned. And I think that exactly what you said, that maybe this is what we needed to do, was show people how to process decades old trauma. And thank you for sharing that. And everyone who showed up, I really appreciate it. This is what we needed. This is what the country needs.
Thanks, Michelle.
Good to see you both.
You too. I love what she touched on. We're kind of talking about a couple different things there, but the information that you have, if say you work in a certain profession, like she's, when she worked homicide, she intricately knew probably which trains and which subway systems were more at risk for violence. And that having that special dark knowledge, unfortunately, you're not walking through happily blind and not having to know that crap, which is why we have people that do those jobs, right? To be able to deal with that and deal with all of the criminal justice system. So the majority of our society can live happy lives and not have to think about that. But the more you know, the more you think that you're safe. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it can go sort of over the top too. Like, you can be a terrible helicopter parent because you're like, oh my God, there's predators everywhere. Right.
That's the challenge, is finding the balance.
Yeah. But that's what these experiences do to us. Like people were talking about, the utter, just the awfulness of the fact that our kids have to go through school shooter drills. That's a whole thing that we didn't have to do, right? So another thing. But if after there was the first movie theater shooting, I know I pick my seat differently. I know I position my child in that show differently. It changes our lives. And if it's a little bit of planning on the front end, and then you can settle in and enjoy your time, great. Just have a plan on the front end and then enjoy yourself. And I think that's the best you can do, is what would I do in this situation, coming full circle back to that. And instead of contemplating it in the moment when you're completely, your emotions are all over the place. So, but what I'm going to do, since we're wrapping up here, is I'm going to put in the chats the two articles that have the research that talks about studies, because there were long-term studies done that looked at post-traumatic stress symptoms in people 10 years out, now 20 years out, what are people still living with? And as you can imagine, I mean, kind of the nutshell version is that the people who were closer to the incident and the trauma have the more pervasive, long-lasting symptoms. And then the kind of ripple effect goes out that if you are less impacted, that you're not having those symptoms, but that still stuff is still going on to today. And the biggest risk factors for folks who are still impacted by post-traumatic stress today, usually there's some other things going on, like other stressors, like they weren't able to find work afterwards. There are co-occurring substance use disorders going on. So there's other major stressors in their life that is sort of keeping that fire of their post-traumatic stress alive that originally stemmed from 9/11.
And of course, completely in line with that is sort of the vicious cycle of how our mental health impacts our physical health. And unfortunately, one of the things that our government, our U.S. government, did not do well was take care of the survivors who were exposed to really ungodly amounts of chemicals that were never meant to come anywhere near mucous membranes in humans. The incidence of cancers, the incidence of respiratory diseases, organ failures has just been horrific, absolutely horrific in many of the survivors because of the constant dust, because they kept going every day to work, and there were not, and the type of ventilators that were needed were not provided, which now, because of that, every law enforcement agency in the country pretty much has decent ventilators, which is great. But one of the things that I put a link to is a charity and a place where you can make donations towards advocacy for supporting the medical health of 9/11 survivors. And that would be a great place for you to put your money. The New York Police Department has a fund. The government has a fund on that as well. And we're still dealing with the long-term physical results of that. And the amount of people that have died as a result of medical injuries is now more than the number of people who died in the initial tragedy, which is just, terrible. It's a terrible thing.
It is. Doesn't Jon Stewart do a lot of work?
Yes.
With I think there's a documentary, a new one called No Responders Left Behind, that it might be on Discovery Plus, but I wanted to see that because I know he's been a real strong advocate for not forgetting those people that went down and did the hardest work and were traumatized over and over again by being the rescue and recovery efforts. Yeah,
we may have an opportunity to do a follow-up episode when things are not so need to be sort of respectful. But the U.S. Congress absolutely dropped the ball and denied many medical claims. That has been since righted, which is really great. There are laws in effect that are meant to make sure that there's funding and medical care for the next 50 years for anybody that survives, that needs medical care, that may have been impacted by the exposure to chemicals at that time.
Right. Well, gosh, I feel like we've done some live streams on some really emotionally important days. I mean, I remember when Los Angeles was going through its protests and riots and helicopters were over your place. And it was just kind of a moment in time for all of us to gather and be together and just kind of talk and process. And I echo what a lot of people were saying here, that this group can be really powerful. It's what we all make it, including you guys coming on, your comments, you guys just being here. Thank you so much for contributing. Because otherwise, Scott and I, we're okay to talk to each other, but you guys add the secret sauce.
Well, the perspective of other people is just so valuable. And, and also Michelle and Shannon, thank you for jumping in.
Yeah.
This is what this is for. We're always happy to have people jump in and share their experience. And hopefully, next time we'll be a little lighter and maybe cover some Alabama pageant stuff, and I can test Dr. Shiloh on her pageant waves. We'll give her
Oh.
another 2 weeks to practice her pageant waves.
Please get me that video footage because people are asking for it from our recording, and I'll put it up on YouTube.
Of me in my high-end recording studio of the hall closet.
Well,
Look
No.
at what you did to me. You're my best friend, and you drove me back into the closet.
sorry.
How did that happen?
I do that to men. All right.
All right,
Thank
everybody.
you guys so much. Take
We love
care.
ya.
Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye.